All right, so we're going to start now. So first of all, thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope that you guys find a lot of value from this presentation. And honestly, if not, let me know. So my name is JP Sherman, and I've been in search technology for about 15 years-ish. I got started when I was working at special operations and psychological operations. We would do campaigns in Southeast Asia for malaria awareness. My commander said, JP, what's a search engine? You need to figure those out. And so I did, and that's how I got into search technology. After that, I became a marketing person, so clearly I'm a horrible person. And even worse, I went into SEO, which is kind of the snake oily kind of, but it's not all bad. Some of us are pretty good. Then I got recruited to a company in LA to help build a search engine for video games. Fortunately, that was in 2007. Nothing bad happened in 2008. So that ended. But eventually, I found my way to Red Hat. I work out in Raleigh, North Carolina. And right now, I am the manager of search and findability. What is search and findability? So clearly, I'm not a developer. I'm not a developer. I don't code. I don't do anything like that. I once tried to code, and I broke the entire search app because I misplaced a curly bracket in my JSON. So that's not what I do. What I do is behavioral science. I look at how users interact with search, and I look at the data to figure out what are they doing? Is the search experience improving? How can I connect with our content writers to make better content? How can I connect with our search engineers to recognize that content? How do I create taxonomies to define products and content types that the search engines will understand? And then from those taxonomies, how do I create a structured markup schema, like this, to create relationships between products, components, and things like that? That's what I do. So what I'm going to be talking about today are the different types of search consumers and stakeholders. Because when you build a search application, when you use search, you're consuming a product that the search engineers and search developers have built. They've built the program that is now designed to be used. What do these users, what do these stakeholders find valuable in that search application? Is the thing that you've built, is it working? Is it working as intended? Is it delivering revenue? Is it delivering engagement? Are people coming back? What are their expectations? So understanding the requests from the different organizations and key stakeholders is, I believe, critical for a search engineer and search developer. If you understand what they're looking for, then you can better provide them answers and deliver better results to your customers. So I generally look at key stakeholders as managers, marketing people, users, and search engineers. These are primarily the four types of groups that are going to either consume or influence the search application. So part of what we're looking at when we're looking at these key different stakeholders is that they expect data from somebody. Sometimes they're going to be asking the search engineers, sometimes they're going to be talking to the marketers about how is search doing? How are you going to answer that question? Are you talking to a marketing person or are you talking to a manager? What is valuable to them? Also, the other really important part is when talking about search to these different key stakeholders, do we talk about metadata, measurements, relevancy rankings, user interface, user design? These are the kind of things that not only they don't influence the machine and how it spits out results, but they definitely influence how people interact with search. And that is a critical component of the search experience. So I'm going to talk about managers for a little bit. I tried to find some clip art on managers, but they're all horrible, so sorry. Managers tend to view data as on a strategic level. They're looking at the impact of various channels on the business. What generates revenue, what consumes revenue, things like that. So from my experience, search, and specifically on-site search, is generally grouped in with marketing, if it's grouped into any organization in the company at all. Because 9 times out of 10, after I've been talking to people, marketers, engineers about on-site search, generally they say, it came with a CMS, and I just let it go. That's generally the attitude that I find. I've actually found that there's some research done in about 2 years ago that said that 14 to 15% of companies actively monitor on-site search. So people generally don't know about it, they don't care about it, and they just don't understand how it can actually influence the behaviors, revenue, and interaction from their users. Some managers group search into an engineering category. It's not wrong. You can pick whichever category it is, but if you know where your managers view search and its place in the structure, you can generally understand what information they're going to find to be valuable. So, if managers tend to see it as a marketing tool, they are looking at search's contribution to revenue. If they can deliver, if people who search, these are generally people who are more engaged with the site because they've actually taken an action. They are conforming to business positive behaviors. You want them to interact with the site. And once they've interacted with the site, they are generally more likely to either consume information or make a purchase. So if on-site search is looked at from a marketing perspective, click-through rate, revenue generated from search, instances, and user experience. Those are really the core aspects of a marketing-focused view of search from a management perspective. So what does that mean? If a manager comes up to you and says, how's search going? Our revenue from search has increased 4% month over month. That's generally going to be good news. Users are staying longer and interacting with more of the sites. When people include search as a part of their session, they tend to check out more. This is the kind of data that, from a marketing perspective, really makes managers happy. And as search developers and engineers, knowing what is considered valuable is going to be absolutely critical. One, to break down kind of communication barriers, but as well, generally people don't know what search can do. And I'm going to be repeating this theme over and over. Managers, marketers, so many people, they don't know what the capabilities of search are, so they generally don't know what to ask for. So if you provide them the data that they can understand and consume, then what they're going to do is they're going to follow with questions, and that gives you an opportunity to tell them, we can do this. So a real practical example is I used to work for an online company that sold bikes. We had just installed solar, and it was running well. We had all of our facets done. But because of the research we were doing, we found that people in LA, so we had over 100 retail stores and 2 major websites. So we noticed that when people in Los Angeles looked for the query bike tires, they generally meant road bike tires. People in Colorado Springs, same query, mountain bike tires was their intent. So what did we do? We looked at their IP location, and we boosted results for road bike tires in LA, mountain bike tires in Colorado Springs. And then we fed off that data. We found that we actually doubled our conversion rate from search for these queries. People were finding what they're looking for, and people were finding what they're looking for faster. They didn't have to muck around in the website to find what they were looking for because we knew what they were looking for. We translated these successes into jerseys. We knew that generally women were more apt to buy a cycling jersey. So when a person was logged in and we had seen in their purchase history that they had purchased women's clothing, we would boost women's jerseys. So this kind of level of personalization we were able to add because we understood the data, we understand the customer, and I, as the marketing guy, was able to talk to the engineering person and said, I have a cool idea. And That was a really fun experiment. Now, when managers look at it primarily from an engineering perspective, they look for click-through rate. And again, this is a very common theme. Everyone really wants to look at click-through rate. Unfortunately, my talk is about click-through rate because it's a very deep subject and really kind of cool if you talk about it. But they look at uptime. They look at instances, and they look at abandonments. They look, does it work? Is it breaking? So they don't tend to look at it from a marketing perspective as a force multiplier to generating revenue, although that's information in and of itself. But when on-site search is delegated to the engineering section, this is kind of what they care for. And honestly, I would recommend, if that's how on-site search is viewed, I would recommend trying to let them know that there are other ways to look at on-site search that can actually improve revenue, engagement, and all these other positive business metrics. All right. So, start with the revenue. And this is kind of a tricky one because I'm generally gearing this towards a retail or e-commerce crowd. At Red Hat, we sell free software. And that's kind of weird because you can use Red Hat Enterprise Linux without paying for it. What you pay for is the subscription that gives you updates, security, customer service, updated packages, things like that. So you don't pay for the software, you pay for the support. So clearly my bias right now when I'm talking to you is talking about retail. But if you're in a knowledge-heavy site where there's no real conversions, this gets a little trickier. So I'm just going to stick with the revenue right now. Letting people know that if you track your revenue based from search, showing them a percentage of how often revenue is increased by percentage from search is a really, really critical metric. Part of that is because it justifies the need, one, to have some sort of optimization efforts on the on-site search, both on the back end to make it faster, more scalable, more deployable, all those things, and also on the content side, because there's going to be some level of marketing, there's going to be some level of content, and if the content that you're indexing can be changed, modified, so that it delivers better information, more quickly identifiable information to the user, that's going to be valuable to them. The other aspect is looking at different types of features. So it's not just natural search. It's also key matching, making sure that things, if you know what they're looking for, key match it. There are a lot of other really good ways to create the search experience. Amazon does a really good job for their product search. So think outside just the 10 blue links. There are a good example is on Google. If you search for Morgan Freeman, you have that knowledge graph. At Red Hat, we have this category of words called the high frequency, low intent. One of our products is called satellite. We don't know if they want bits, information, support, anything. So these are your very popular words, but you have no idea what they want. So we built a knowledge graph that when somebody types in satellite, we have a knowledge graph that appears to the right of the search results that says product page, download page, documentation, and evaluation, or try before you buy. And we found that users, when they're confronted with the knowledge graph on the side, we get between a 68 and a 75% click-through rate because that satisfies most of their user intent, because the natural search results can get a little too specific. Communicating with marketers. The goal of marketing is to create measurable funnels for people to perform an action. This action can be either a conversion, as in a purchase, or a consumption. What's a consumption? When I look at knowledge-based content, a consumption is when a user searches, clicks, lands on a page, do they scroll, and how much time do they spend on that page? So clearly, you need a good definition of what a search session looks like. But if the content we know that it takes 4 minutes to read. So if the user scrolls 80% down the page and spends 3 minutes and 30 seconds on the page, we consider that a likely consumption. This is very qualitative. We know it's very fuzzy. I tell people that it feels a little 8-bit resolution to me. It's still kind of Pong, but it's better than nothing. And so when you're looking at it in aggregate, that kind of data becomes extraordinarily useful as a consumption metric, because you could have content that ranks really, really well. It fits perfectly to a particular query, and then you look at the consumption rate on that particular document and you say, oh, people consume it at 10%. So clearly, this document is ranking for a query that it really shouldn't, because it's not useful to the user. So this can either do a couple things. You can either figure out why does this content rank, modify the content so that it ranks for a more appropriate keyword, or we use signals and fusion. We look at it and say, okay, this is getting a negative response rate, so we deboost that content in our search results, and we allow other pieces of content to bubble up and take its place. And over time, that fills our search results with much better results, because we have the ability to measure a user response. And we want to avoid the piece of content is popular because it ranks high, therefore making it a popular in signals. And so when we have a way to kind of break that kind of autocatalytic feedback loop where it's only there because it's popular, and it's popular because it's there. So for marketers, what value does search provide? And I'll be super honest. I go to marketing conferences, and only once or twice have people come up to me and says, I actively optimize on-site search. I look at what on-site search does, and when I talk to my search engineers, they look at me like I'm from another planet, because I don't know what they do. They don't really know what I do. So marketers want to solve problems. They want to create funnels, and they want to increase all of their metrics, such as, again, revenue. And they generally don't even know the questions to ask developers, other than, why doesn't X rank? Can you make X number one? And why does this piece of content exist? Or, this page sucks and it looks bad, fix it. And it's not generally it's not because they are, it's generally because they're ignorant of what search can do and how search influences content, how search reads content, things like that. Marketers are generally looking for things like, what are the top queries? They look at the metadata. And one of the things, having both lived in the search engine optimization world and the search technology world, there's generally a lot of conversation about metadata. So when I talk about metadata right now, I'm talking about the metadata that exists inside the head in the HTML. So Google used to look at meta keywords as a ranking signal. And then because we can't have nice things on the internet, people would spam them. They would have keyword tags with hundreds of keywords in it. So Google's like, nope. And then Bing, Yahoo, and pretty much every other search engine was like, yeah, no, we're going to ignore meta keywords. So people involved in search who are primarily focused on SEO was like, hey guys, let's just don't worry about the meta keywords thing. However, through the research that I've done, I've been able to show that having proper meta keywords in the pages, in the content, can actually boost on-site search relevancy significantly. One of the experiments that I did is I took 50 documents that did not rank below page 2. Of those 50 documents, I added specific meta keywords into the pages, and after we re-indexed them, and after 1 week, 90% of those documents that I modified the metadata to were now either in the top 5, over 95% of them were in the top 10, 60% were in the top 5. So this is a significant contribution to essentially kind of crowdsourcing relevancy through meta keywords. And honestly, if you work with an SEO type person, let them know that Even though Google ignores meta keywords, it is critical to our relevancy, our understanding, and our own on-site search rankings that metadata is included. Again, this is one of those side notes where I say there's a larger conversation about metadata and keywords and things like that that is fascinating, but I don't have time to really kind of go over that right now. So this is where we start talking about the data. Marketers, again, generally because of ignorance, marketers don't know what kind of information, what kind of data that can be provided from on-site search. If we can start looking at data that, what are the queries that don't convert? What are queries that showed 0 results? If you start looking at search engine results as impressions, and when I say impressions, I'm looking at, like, in advertising language, when an ad shows up, that's 1 impression. For example, like AdWords. If an ad shows up, that's an impression. If it shows up 100 times and gets clicked once, that's a 1% click-through rate. So I look at our search results that only show up. So I don't look at all the impressions, I just look at the ones that a user clicks on. So if they look at page 1, I have 10 impressions. If they look at page 2, I have 20 impressions. So I look at content that shows up from the search result as impressions. And when I see a piece of content that has a high impression rate but a low click-through rate, I look at it and say, try to figure out, why is this showing up? Why is this ranking for this particular word? Is this a relevant word, or is this just a fluke? How can we make the content better? Is this something on the content side, or is this something on the technology side? Kind of a real clear example of that is we have what's called our KCS, knowledge-centered solutions. When a customer comes in and says, hey, my Linux broke, we have a customer support representative, they help them through the problem, and then what they do is they write a solutions article that says, here's how to fix Linux. That content gets indexed by Solr, and it becomes evergreen content. We also have documentation, which is, how do I install Red Hat Enterprise Linux? How do I migrate? How do I administrate? So what's happening is that queries that were once solved by documentation are now being solved by solutions. And so you start getting an overlap of, when I say, how do I install X, solution content, because it is tightly written, it is completely appropriate and completely representative of that one user intent, our solution content would start overtaking the search results of the documentation content. So one of the things that we started to do was look at how we would build an intention engine to figure out, is a user looking for something, is a user looking for a break fix, or are they looking to add information or increase their knowledge? So it's not perfect, but that's one of the things that we're starting to do at Red Hat is look at single solutions and fixing something that's broken, or learning how to do something. And once we kind of figure out how we do that, the search result is going to be better. And we're going to when we have that data, because we have impression data, we have conversion data, we have consumption data, and these are the kind of things that will directly affect how things rank and the ability of users to immediately recognize that this thing that somehow ranks is valuable to them. So this is when we talk about metrics and click-through rates. So one of the things I take a look at is the overall click-through rate. And I have a model. I look at a weighted click-through rate. We have the number of search instances. We also have instances in where a key match shows up and where a key match is clicked. We have the knowledge graph. We have instances where the knowledge graph shows up and it's clicked. And then we're building a faceting system where it's going to be a little tricky, because if a user searches for something and then they click on a facet, that's technically 2 instances. So what's going to happen is our denominator is going to inflate while our numerator stays the same, and the overall click-through rate is going to plummet. So one of the things that we're trying to do is create this thing called a finstance. Dumb word, but I kind of like it. And it's a sub-instance of a regular instance, it's a filtered instance. So that way, we can actually segment out the filtered clicks, the filtered instance, and the faceted instance so that we can actually take a look at the weighted click-through rate where based on the number of instances, based on the number of clicks, we have an overall click-through rate. And then we have a by channel or by feature click-through rate. Another way that we look at collecting this kind of data is snippet design. Sometimes it's just 10 blue links, but does documentation deserve its own design snippet? Do videos deserve their own specially designed snippet? If you're selling cars, how do you design the snippet so that the immediate sense of value to the user is conveyed through the snippet? So we do a lot of A/B testing in our snippet design, everything from tiny gray lines between the search results to like a hover over. So we look at how does this influence user behavior? How does this tell a story to not just management but marketers as well? One of the stories that I like to tell is several years ago, ThinkGeek did a April Fool's joke about a Tauntaun sleeping bag. I happen to be one of the friends of one of the people at ThinkGeek, and he said that the search volume for Tauntaun sleeping bag went through the roof. They heard it on social media. People actually believed that it existed, and people were searching for it. So having a system to identify new keywords, calculate the vector, speed and intensity, or speed and direction of those new keywords can actually be incredibly useful information to not just marketers but managers as well. As this is a thing that people are looking for. This is a thing that people are interested in. How can we satisfy this need? And this is discovery through an intelligent way of measuring search. And in their case, they made it real. So now we're going to talk about users. What users want is generally very simple. And they don't care about you. They really don't. They know that they can go to Google and find something if they don't find it with you. They want speed. They don't want your app to be hanging and having a little waiting signal because they know that they can get it in less than a second with Google. They want trust signals. And a trust signal really boils down to snippet design. One example was, I'm going to go back to the bike example again. For the search results on Google, for the query road bikes, you see Amazon-road bikes, road bikes-Walmart, road bikes-Trek. And when I was there, I was like, you know what, this is stupid and it looks dumb. So I started writing the metadata and started writing the content that says things like lightweight and fast bikes for the open road. I didn't optimize for engines. I optimized for emotions. I optimized for people. And I wanted them to feel that this thing is going to make them happy. And because I started looking at optimizing for experiences instead of optimizing for bots, letting your content writers know that this is how they're going to connect with their users. Having this trust signal, like, I can relate to this looks valuable, I'm going to click it. Because when users come to your site, they have acceptance and rejection criteria already in their head. They kind of know they either know what they want or they don't know what they want, but they know how to look, and they generally don't know how to look for something. But they'll know it when they find it. So when they search for something on your site, they're automatically processing these acceptance and rejection criteria in their head. And if they're presented with information on the search results page that speaks to what's valuable to them, they're going to click. Users want to find what they're looking for predictably. And what I mean by predictably is they don't want to have to refine. we talk about pogo sticking, and that is a query, a click, a page view, and then back to search. One of the things that we do, we know that Google does this. One of the things we do is we look at the amount of people who pogo stick. And if we see pogo sticking on start to permeate through some of our content, that's a bad result. And this is a kind of thing that is, it's honestly really, it's one of the more important things. Understanding that behavior is going to make your search results better. It's going to make users happier because, again, they know that they're going to find it in Google. And if you deliver them a good experience, no reaction is generally better than a negative reaction. And I say this because as a search professional, the expectation is that it works. They're not going to be happy if it works. But they will tell you if it doesn't work, and that will make them incredibly unhappy. I have literally been told that search needs to die in a fire because they had bad results. And to me, that's just like, there's no better way than to upset a customer by giving them poor results. And so I want to set the expectation among search professionals, marketers, and everybody who understands this is that balloons are not going to drop out of the ceiling if a user finds a good result. Other things will drop from the ceiling if there are bad results. And again, users, and generally at this point, users don't care where they get their information. They just want their information. If they can find it with you, fantastic. If they can find it somewhere else, also good for them. It is our job as developers, engineers, behavioral nerds like me, and content creators, and people like that to really kind of talk together and figure out what is the best, how do we deliver the results, deliver the expectations, and deliver them consistently in a way that users can react to positively. Because I'll tell you right now, when you start getting bad experiences, people are happy to ditch. They will ditch your site, they'll go to Google, they'll go somewhere else. And part of that behavior is that we're looking at dwell time. And dwell time is a fairly critical metric when looking at user behavior. Through research that I've done through other sites and things like that, as well as in partnerships with other agencies, and as well as some insight from Google, we know that on average, a user is going to spend between 8 and 11 seconds on your search engine results page. So if you have 10 blue links, you are looking at less than 1 second per snippet. And it even gets worse than that. You have about 1 second for the first 4 links and about half a second for links after 4. So it kind of distributes like that. So if the content that is going to solve the user's intent is on link 8, they may not find it. And that's a really critical thing. So understanding how users look at the search engine results page is going to be incredibly critical. And this is why I really kind of obsess, harp, get on a soapbox about users finding value in the search engine result page in the link that appears. Snippet design is absolutely critical to capture the interest and intent of the user. So with that in mind, if you know how long they're going to take, so obviously, your dwell times may vary, but this is a really important. I'm having a hard time describing this all of a sudden. You guys are giving me dry mouth. So combining all of these user behavior, their willingness to ditch, their expectation of it just working, any kind of negative attitudes towards it not working, A/B tests, running tests constantly on your search engine results page is going to provide clear, quick, and immediate value. So this is where I encourage everyone to start talking to designers. Don't just go for default. Don't do what Google does, because Google is Google, and I'm not Google. My users expect something different. My users expect relevant information that's relevant to them. For e-commerce sites, is price a factor? Does adding price in the snippet increase revenue? Or they're like, whoop, I don't want to pay that much. This is a little scary. So do you hide the price? What are the kind of value, what are the kind of features, what are the kind of things that you can pull from either the metadata, the schema, or schema sometimes means something like structured markup. What kind of information can you pull from the data that you already have to create the user experience in the search engine's result page on the snippet to convey value? So just to recap, managers, they generally want to look at business goals. Marketers, they want to influence the buying funnel. And users want quick information quickly and efficiently. So how do we use this information? Obviously, the things I'm talking about right now, it's not rocket science. I'm telling you guys, talk to each other. This is no big revolution or revelation for any of us. We all know that we should talk to each other. We all complain about how siloed things are. And we know this. I'm not telling you anything in this manner that you probably already didn't know. Siloing is generally bad. Collaboration is good. That's the simple part. But where it gets hard, and this is something that I really want to express to you, is that it's like running. It's the doing it every day that is hard. It is not the action that is hard. It is the consistency that is hard. But once that consistency turns into a habit, then it gets easier. It gets so much easier. So understanding what creates value in your in the minds of your customer, being able to measure the things that are important to different key stakeholders, and then, of course, building ways to share information from search to anyone is going to be critical. And I'll give you a really practical example of this. We use Drupal as our primary CMS. So one of the things that we've done is we've built a pipe. I don't know if I'm using the right word. It's from Solar through our analytics program. On every single page that is in Drupal, we have here's how many times this piece of content showed up in search. Here are the keywords that we know it showed up for. Here are the number of times it was clicked. Here are the number of times it was consumed. And then so our writers know that for this universe of keywords, this document showed up. This is the user's reaction. And so given that information, we see higher rates of edits. We see higher rates of more specificity. And so it kind of pushes our content writers to do better, to make more relevant content. And in turn, it becomes easier for our search engineers to do their job better because they're getting better information, more specific information, and ultimately, everyone gets better value from that. Thank you so much for listening to me. You can, I appreciate any feedback that you give me. Sometimes critique is polish. So I definitely appreciate that, and I think we have a few more minutes for some questions. Yes?
I think you hit on that. Getting good qualitative feedback is hard. Do you do anything to drive better qualitative feedback from users, marketers, managers, other than search is fine or search sucks? Does that make sense?
Yes. So the question was, what do we do to get better qualitative information from these different key stakeholders? So obviously, within a 30-ish minute presentation, I didn't want to get too deep into that because there are bigger concepts to kind of tackle. But the primary group of people that I spend the most time with are our content writers. And because we are producing content at hundreds a day. And so right now, our body of content is well over 500,000 documents. Videos, documentation, solutions, articles, lab applications, things like that. So the first thing that I do, and I'll use the analogy of resolution. I used to work in the video game industry, so 8-bit, 16-bit, 32-bit is kind of a natural progression for me. So right now we really have kind of an 8-bit resolution on the quantitative data that we send to people. The first thing we look at is click-through rate. We want to see how many, and the reason why we do that is because a very low click-through rate means low relevancy. A higher click-through rate, obviously it's not going to be, you know, there's no real correlation, but it's a very good signal of checking the health. So then we start looking at the click-through rates for different content types, and we can see that for our solution content, so I think more to your point, the segmentation of types is going to be really critical to identify what is succeeding and what is failing. For e-commerce, you know, what's the click-through rate on product pages versus how-to videos. Another aspect of that is real simple, the conversion rate from search. And what that means is that if at some point search was used in the session, and then there was a purchase, or even add to cart or checkout, that's considered a successful search. And then beyond that, we're running out of time. So if you don't mind, if you have any more other questions, I'll be right outside, and you guys can talk to me later, but I want to respect the other speaker and things like that. Thank you.